So here we are once again. My life in film. This time I was turning 3 years old this year. The year is 1975. I still probably wasn't really paying attention to what films I was watching, but by this point I'm pretty sure my mum was sneaking me into the cinema every now and then. So 1975, what a defining year for cinema as far as I'm concerned, as far as impact on my life, not just from the films that got released, but also from various events that were going on at the time, things that would lead to some quite influential things coming up. I mean, if you look at the top 10 list for films for this year, and this is the top 10 list from the US, because even though there's all this online archive, it's only things like Box Office Mojo tend to cover either the US or the international, but don't actually break down UK, etc. And a lot of the figures are very speculative. But anyway, that list of 10 films, there's a few films in there that you might recognise. I mean, you know, there's a few obscurities. I mean, there's something about a shark at the top of that list. Don't know what was happening there. But, you know, you've got to say that there's some truly iconic films with iconic stars within that list. 1975, what a year. To pick out, if I was asked to pick out my favourite films from that year, the only thing that would be a constant would be that shark movie would be in there. So 1975 was an important year for me and for the industry of film, not because of anything that I did, because I was still quite young, but because it was the year that George Lucas formed Industrial Light and Magic, who would go on to make a bit of a name for themselves with regard to special effects technology over the decades to follow, and even today are still pretty much a well-respected effects team. Maybe they've got competition from, you know, Weta Digital, etc. these days, but bearing in mind that this was the company that he formed in order to make a small little film that would come out in 2 more years, and we'll get to that when we get to 1977. So this is also the year that the prominent film critics Siskel and Ebert got their break on a film review show called Sneak Previews, and they thrust the whole world of film criticism into the public persona, and it suddenly became, you know, everyone became involved in following what critics were saying and listening to what they were saying and how they were talking about film, particularly, like, you know, solid critics. I mean, yes, you didn't have to agree with them. Yes, they didn't often agree with them each other, but the whole idea was they could speak about what their reservations were when they didn't like something, and they could also pick out what stood out on films that they thought were monumental. This was when film criticism became huge, and, you know, the reason why I'm doing this video channel today, and loads of other, like, homemade critics love to, like, share their opinions, is because people like Siskel and Ebert, and later on, like in the UK, Barry Norman, and, you know, today we've got Commode. You know, they tell us that it's fine to like what you like, as long as you can justify why you like it, and it's fine to dislike what you dislike, as long as you can back up your dislike with real, like, subjective reasons. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to films. After all, I'm the guy who loves Wild Wild West and hates anyone who likes this. There's also that small film about a shark that I've mentioned a couple of times, which kind of set the staple for summer blockbusters, paving the way for many event films to come each year from that point on. And it was a director, I think his name was Steven Spielberg. I wonder what happened to him. Anyway, 1975 contains quite a few examples of films that I've still not got round to watching. For example, Barry Lyndon, the Kubrick film that a lot of people hold in high regard, and I've actually got on a Blu-ray box set with all the other Kubrick films, and I've still not watched it. And I think it's because so many people hold it in regard that it puts me off. But I'm working on that. I'm working on getting round to all those films that I should have seen, as I've discussed on a previous video. You've also got films like Hard Times by Walter Hill, which stars Charles Bronson, or The Man Who Would Be King. You know, there's a load of films from this year that I still need to get round to, and I will. I mean, Funny Lady, which was in that top 10 earlier. I've now seen Funny Girl, which was the film before it, and now I'm intrigued to watch Funny Lady and see, what happened next. However, there are a significant number of films from 1975 that I've seen and had a huge impact on me. One of which, and we will get around to that shark movie in a bit, but one of which is about a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania. And I absolutely adore the Rocky Horror Show. At an early age, when I caught it, Tim Curry dressed as Frankenfurter awakened something in me. And, it's safe to say that I found him quite an attractive man. In the same way that these days I find Ryan Reynolds quite an attractive man. But, yeah, this film I have watched so many times, and people know what my love is for it, because I have a tendency to suddenly break out in a rendition of Sweet Transvestite. How do you do, I? See, you've met my... Loads of people have been subjected to that in full entirety. I adore this film. I mean, what a film. I mean, Susan Sarandon is in there, Barry Bostwick, they play Janet and Brad, or Brad and Janet. You've got Meatloaf in there, Charles Gray, Patricia Quinn, a variety of British thespians from all aspects of the industry. And it's an absolute pleasure. If you've never had the pleasure of watching it, please do. Please immerse yourself in this film. Do not watch the recent remake that Sky dished out. It wasn't bad, but it's not a patch on this cast. This cast make it amazing, and it's the reason why it gets so many repeat viewings at cinemas, with people throwing rice and getting interactive with it. Marvellous film. Elsewhere, there's another musical which was causing a bit of a stir. Ken Russell adapted The Who's Tommy, the rock opera, and that hit the screens with like Anne Margaret, Oliver Reed, Elton John, Jack Nicholson, Tina Turner, and of course The Who themselves. The film got a good reception. It's fantastic music, and it's a great testament to an album that it was drawn from. Another one well worth checking out. Looks very dated, but a cracking musical experience. And speaking of Jack Nicholson, he could also be seen that year in the absolute gem of a film that we covered just a few episodes back on the podcast in one of our deep dives, and that is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Considered one of the most important films of the 20th century, directed by Milos Forman, starred Jack Nicholson as Randall McMurphy, an anti-authoritarian criminal serving a short sentence who's transferred to a mental institution for evaluation after, faking it to try and get a softer sentence. And he comes up against Nurse Ratched, played by Louise Fletcher, as the authoritarian nurse on the ward. And it's a great battle of wills between the two to control the souls of the institution. Marvellous film. Rewatching it recently for the deep dive, and if you want to know our full feelings on this film, go back to that episode and give it a listen. And it just every time I watch it, I just find myself completely embroiled in it again. Marvellous film. Comedies that year, another one that we did a deep dive on, Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail, or Monty Python and the Holy Grail, came out this year, and that, like I say, that was covered on a deep dive. The Python team's best film as far as I'm concerned. Yes, it's not the best structured film, because Life of Brian is a really well structured film, but this is a great mash of Python-esque humour thrown into a Arthurian legend kind of way. Absolutely zany. For zany as well, people who love the early years of Woody Allen, of which I'm quite a fan. I know he's been cancelled recently by so many people, but I'm still going to show my love for early Allen. I loved his zany political satires and comedies, and this year his finest one was released, Love and Death. If you've never seen it, that's one to watch. Definitely one to watch. We also saw The Return of the Pink Panther, which saw Peter Sellers return to the franchise, about the clueless Detective Inspector Clouseau. So comedy was quite well covered just with those three films that year. Moving on to a bit of action, and Godzilla was still stomping those petrol stations and still terrorising cities in the 15th film in the franchise, and this one was a sequel to the previous year's Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla, called Terror of Mechagodzilla, and it ended up being the franchise's least successful film. It was the most disappointing at the box office, and to be honest, it's one of the most disappointing as a film. Not the only disappointing monster film that year, as Doug McClure, not Troy McClure, who I always want to say, because that's a character from The Simpsons, Doug McClure starred in The Land That Time Forgot, which saw Doug and a few others stranded on an island with rich vegetation and populated by dinosaurs. It was great to see as a child. The effects were poor even for the time, opting for puppets rather than stop motion, and stop motion, as you know from the last video, Harryhausen, love him. Watching the film now is only recommended for those who've drunken copious amounts of alcoholic beverages or taken some illegal substances. The future at this point was being presented on films in a very bleak way. The sci-fi films of the past were anything to go by. Sports would have been deadly with things like Death Race 2000 and Rollerball. Both the films having a degree of social and political satire, and both proffering a vision of the future where national entertainment is provided by bloody sporting events. And this is a theme that followed in decades to come, even like to films like Running Man, which takes the same kind of political satires, and the remakes of Death Race, for example, and Rollerball. Yeah, it became, this was the era when dystopian futures and the satire of entertainment was starting to grow, and we look around ourselves these days and we see the kind of crass garbage that's on TV, and you can't help but think that these films kind of foresaw exactly where we were going to be going, that we would all be sat at home, channel hopping, streaming service, watch the latest reality show, watch the latest people making embarrassments of themselves on an island where they're trying to basically end up in bed together. Yeah, we've grown tired of real life, that we're now watching artificial real life on the screen, and it's only a matter of time before Rollerball becomes an actual thing. But anyway, we come down to talking about that shark film. So Steven Spielberg's Jaws. Jaws has to be within pretty much everyone's top 10 films of all time, and the only people that don't have it within their top 10 are people who've still not got round to seeing it, of which those people I say, what are you doing with your lives? Get this film watched. It was notorious for struggling so much on set. Things kept going wrong. Bruce, the mechanical shark, kept sinking or breaking, so wrecking the shots. The film went over budget. Spielberg, it was his first time of actually trying to make a big feature for the big screen, and his career could have just ended at this point. The actions of the cast were getting frustrated on sets. Shaw was apparently quite belligerent and made a few enemies on set. In the end, they had to cut out pretty much all the shots of the shark because it didn't look right, it looked fake, and it failed so many times. So we ended up with a film where the monster wasn't seen for most of the monster movie. And that became the reason why, well, one of the reasons why it became such an iconic film. The tease of what you didn't see, the tease of the build-up until we finally get the reveal of the shark and that improvised line, you're going to need a bigger boat. It's iconic. Everything that went wrong to create the right output. And it's a film that, even though there are scenes that look cheesy, there are scenes that don't quite live up to the modern special effects, it still chills, it still thrills, and it's ideal for... My kids were introduced to it at quite an early age, in the same way that I was introduced to this film at quite an early age, and it still chills them. They still love it. If I suggest, like, let's all sit around and watch Jaws, I'm pretty sure that they'll sit around and watch Jaws with me, because they've even snuck me DVD into their rooms before now just to sit and watch Jaws again. It's a great film. It lasts the test of time, and yeah, Spielberg demonstrated straight out the gate what he is capable of and how he is capable of turning a mess into a work of art. Such a shame that in recent years with films like Ready Player One, he did the exact reverse. He turned what could have been a work of art into a mess. But anyway, more on that when and if we eventually get to that year. So, that's my kind of rundown of 1975. Obviously there's a load of films I've not covered here, so if you've got a few favourites, pop them in the comments down below, or head over to Twitter and engage with me on my @FilmFileUK account. Thank you for watching. I'll be back soon with 1976. Like, subscribe, share, you know the business. You're all great, you're all awesome, stay safe.